She noticed on the third day, but she waited until the seventh to say anything. That's how I knew my silence had finally gotten louder than all the excuses she'd been living inside. The strange part wasn't that I stopped talking. It was that she felt it before I ever told her why. Her name was Claire, and for most of our relationship, I was the one who kept things moving. If a conversation got tense, I lightened it. If she pulled away, I crossed the room. If she got sharp, I found the softer interpretation and handed it back to her like a gift. I didn't think of it as weakness at the time. I thought I was being mature, patient, the kind of man who didn't make every bad feeling into a courtroom. We'd been together 5 years, living together for 2. Our apartment had the kind of familiarity that makes people think they're solid. Her mug on the left side of the sink, my keys always on the little tray by the door, a blanket on the couch with one corner permanently folded because she twisted it around her wrist when she watched TV. If you had come over for dinner that month, you probably would have said we seemed tired, maybe busy, but fine. That's the dangerous version of not fine, the kind that still knows where everything belongs. The thing that started it wasn't dramatic enough to justify how much it stayed with me. It wasn't a lipstick mark or some half-hidden text thread lighting up at 2 a.m. It was a voicemail. I was in the car outside the grocery store, engine off, checking if she'd texted me back about pasta or rice. Her phone had synced to the Bluetooth the last time she borrowed my car, and for some reason it was still there in the recent devices list. I didn't even mean to click it. I hit the wrong thing and suddenly a message started playing through the speakers. A man's voice, warm, casual, too comfortable. "Hey, I know you're probably home by now. You left your earring in my car again. I'm starting to think you do that on purpose." Then he laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not a co-worker laugh. The kind of laugh people use when there's already a private joke standing between them. There was a pause, and then he added, quieter, "Call me when you can. And don't overthink tonight. I meant what I said." That was it. No name, no full confession, no body hitting the floor. Just a voice in my car, smiling into my life like he had every right to be there. I sat there so long the windshield started to fog. The first thing I did was check the passenger seat, which made me feel insane. Like maybe I'd find some physical explanation sitting there waiting to rescue me from what I had just heard. Of course there was nothing. Just an old receipt, 2 pens, and a cardigan she kept forgetting to bring inside. I listened to the message twice more. Then I drove home with groceries I barely remembered buying. Claire was standing at the stove when I walked in, hair clipped up, one sock on, one bare foot tapping against the tile while she stirred something in a pan. "Rice," she said, before I even put the bags down. I changed my mind. I remember looking at her ear first. Only one earring. That actually made me smile, which is still humiliating to admit, not because it was funny, because my body had no idea what to do with the shock, so it reached for the nearest thing that looks normal. "Long day?" she asked. "Something like that." She turned, looked at me properly, and for a second I thought maybe she knew, but she just took the groceries from my hands and said, "You forgot the good yogurt again." I almost said, "You left your earring in another man's car again." Instead I said, "Sorry." That was day 1. I didn't decide to stay quiet like it was some strategy. It happened because I realized, standing there in our kitchen, that I suddenly didn't trust the first version of anything. Not hers. Not mine. If I confronted her right there, I'd do what I always did. I'd lead. I'd hand her all the missing pieces. I'd make it easier for her to shake the story around my hurt. So I said nothing. Not cruel silence. I answered questions, passed the salt, asked if she wanted coffee, but I stopped offering myself. No extra commentary, no easy laughter, no emotional stepping stones across the uncomfortable parts of the day. By day 2, she started watching me, not openly, just those little side glances people do when they're checking whether the weather has changed. If I was on the couch, she'd pause in the doorway a second too long. If we ate dinner, she'd ask, "Everything okay?" in that casual tone that means nothing is casual. I'd say, "Yeah," and that was it. Usually I would have followed with something. "Work's been weird, didn't sleep great, just tired." something to reassure her that if there was distance in the room, it had a harmless explanation. This time I let the distance exist. By day 3, she tried affection. She came up behind me while I was making coffee, slid her arms around my waist, pressed her cheek between my shoulder blades. Normally I would have leaned back into her automatically. That morning I just stood there, holding the mug while the machine hissed. "You're quiet," she said. "Am I?" She gave a small laugh. "You know you are." I turned, kissed her forehead because anything more felt false, and said, "Just thinking." That answer bothered her more than I expected. Maybe because thinking suggested there was something happening inside me she couldn't immediately access. That night she got dressed to go out for one drink with co-workers. She stood in the bedroom mirror redoing her lipstick twice. I sat on the edge of the bed tying my shoes for absolutely nowhere. "You don't mind, right?" she asked. "No." She looked at me in the mirror. "You can say if you do." I shrugged. "Have fun." She left 10 minutes later than she meant to. I think she was waiting for me to ask who was going, or where, or whether I could come by later. I didn't ask any of it. When she got home, it was just after midnight. I was awake, lamp on, book open, but unread. She stopped in the doorway. "You're still up? Couldn't sleep?" There was a pause. "You didn't text." I looked up. "About? I don't know. To check in." That was the first honest thing either of us had said all week. I marked my place in the book and said, "I figured you were busy." She stood there for another second, then went to the bathroom and shut the door harder than necessary. By day 4, she started picking little fights. Not full arguments. Test balloons. I loaded the dishwasher wrong. I forgot to move the laundry. I answered a question with "sure" instead of "okay," and apparently my tone meant something now. I could feel her reaching for the old pattern, the one where I would defend myself, then over-explain, then end up reassuring her, until whatever guilt she carried had somewhere else to land. But I wasn't angry enough to fight, and I wasn't willing to rescue her from the tension anymore. So when she said, "You've been weird all week," I just nodded. That really got to her. "Weird how?" I asked. She crossed her arms. "Distant. Maybe. I looked at her for a second and said, "You'd know better than me." She went very still after that. Not because it was some brilliant line. It wasn't. But it was the first time I'd handed the discomfort back without softening it first. Day 5 was the hardest because I almost broke. She left her phone on the kitchen counter while she showered, and it buzzed twice. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The screen lit up just enough for me to see the name. Evan. No last name. Just Evan, like that was supposed to mean innocence. The second message preview only showed 5 words. "You okay after earlier?" I stared at it until the screen went black. Then I went outside and sat on the apartment steps in a t-shirt while the evening air turned cold against my arms. Not because I was trying to be dramatic, because I suddenly understood that the voicemail wasn't a one-off mystery. It had a shape now, a name, a continuation. Claire came out 20 minutes later with wet hair and no shoes. "What are you doing out here?" "Nothing." She sat beside me anyway. For a second, neither of us spoke. Cars moved through the lot. Somebody upstairs dropped something heavy. Our neighbor's wind chime kept knocking softly against the railing. Then she asked very quietly, "Are you mad at me?" I could have ended it right there. I could have turned, said his name, repeated the voicemail word for word, watched the whole week crack open. But something in me wanted one last thing, not proof, not details, just the dignity of seeing whether she would walk herself to the truth, if I left enough silence in the room. So I said, "Should I be?" Her eyes flicked to my face so fast it was almost a flinch. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, still looking out at the parking lot, "I've been giving you a lot of chances to tell me if something's wrong." She stood up immediately. "This is ridiculous." That was her word when something was too close to becoming real. Ridiculous, dramatic, insecure. Those were her exit signs. I stayed on the steps after she went back inside. "Day 6, she cried. Not in front of me at first. I heard it through the bedroom door when I came home from work earlier than expected. That sound stopped me in the hallway because Claire almost never cried without trying to make it quieter than breathing. I stood there with my hand on the frame, listening to this woman I loved break in private, and for one awful second I wanted to forget everything, walk in, hold her, let her tell me some manageable version of the truth, so I could choose mercy before anger had a chance to fully arrive. Instead, I went to the kitchen and put my keys down loudly enough for her to hear. By the time she came out, her face was washed and composed. "We need to talk," she said. I looked at her and almost laughed from the exhaustion of it. Finally, she sat across from me at the kitchen table and kept rubbing her thumb against the side of her water glass. "There's someone at work," she said. Not there was, not happened, there is. I let that sit. She rushed to fill it. It wasn't supposed to become anything. We just started talking more, and then, after the conference last month, the voicemail played in my car, I said. That stopped her. What? Last Monday, from Evan. About your earring. All the color drained from her face so quickly it was almost frightening. You knew? I nodded. For a week? Yeah. She looked down at her hands, then back at me, and what hurt most in that moment was not guilt on her face. It was recognition. Like suddenly the whole strange week made sense to her, all at once. That's why, she whispered. I didn't answer. She started crying again, but now there was no point hiding it. She told me it had been going on for 2 months. Started as lunches, then drinks. Then one night after a conference when she stayed over because she didn't want to go home and pretend she was fine. I asked what that meant, and she said she'd been unhappy for longer than she admitted, and maybe longer than she even knew. Maybe that was true. Maybe it wasn't. Cheating has a way of making every earlier sadness sound newly convenient. Then she said something I still think about. I knew something was wrong by the second day, she said. You weren't reaching for me. That phrase lodged itself right under my ribs, because she was right. That was the difference. Not that I was colder, not that I was punishing her. I had simply stopped reaching. For years, I had been the one stretching across every silence, every misunderstanding, every strange mood, every half-closed door. I kept thinking love meant never letting distance settle. But all that week, for the first time, I let her feel the exact amount of closeness she was actually creating. And she noticed first, not because she suddenly became perceptive, because she had always known how much of the relationship was being quietly carried for her. We separated a month later. No plates thrown, no dramatic last kiss in the doorway. Just boxes, paperwork, a friend with a truck, and a woman standing in our emptying living room, crying because the life she stepped out on still looked like home when it was being taken apart. The last thing she said before she left was, I think I knew you loved me most when you went quiet. I didn't say anything back. There didn't seem to be a version of that moment improved by words. But I've thought about it a lot since then. Not because silence saved me, it didn't. The truth was already there. What silence did was show me where the weight had been all along. And once I felt that clearly, I couldn't go back to calling it love just because I was the one strong enough to keep dragging it forward.